paren el mundo que me quiero bajar. Es una frase que se repite, que mencionaba una caricatura muy conocida de un dibujante de Argentina, y creo que refleja muy bien cómo se siente gran parte de esta nueva generación en el país, en el mundo, que sin lograr comprender en profundidad la diferencia entre lo simple y lo complejo, creen que actuando bajo su instinto, bajo una emoción, bajo el impulso de una épica que se les ha enseñado, creen que pueden solucionar problemas que escapan a las grandes mentes que han compartido, que han formado parte de nuestra especie. Hoy tenemos el agrado de compartir con una de ellas, poder escucharlo, conocerlo personalmente. Lo tengo sentado al lado mío, el doctor David FRIEDMAN, doctor en física, economista, contribuciones también en el mundo de las leyes, en el derecho, que ha escrito grandes libros como La maquinaria de la libertad, El orden del derecho, Price Theory, entre muchos otros. Pueden encontrar muchos de sus títulos y algunos de sus pensamientos, de las cosas que existen en una mente tan particular como la de él, en su página www.daviddfriedman.com, en el cual seguramente se llevarán más de una idea inquietante, que es lo que buscan hacer pensadores de su nivel: inquietar a las personas con cosas que tal vez no se nos han ocurrido. Thank you very much for being with us today. In this second section, we just want to talk a little bit more intimate with you. And there's no doubt that you are a remarkable mind in your work, your commitment, with the seek of truth, your knowledge, which is not a really usual thing in our species. So you being really honest in your work. You always done what you think. You always been in the seek of truth instead of trying to get to your preconceived conclusions, yes, which is something really valuable, and especially these times where academics have been awarded for saying what is politically correct or what they want to say. Professor, to a mind like yours, I want to ask you, what irritates you?
People saying things that either they should obviously know are not true, or that they do know are not true and say anyway. So that my most recent irritation is an article on the effects of climate change, in which the people claimed to estimate the damage done by additional carbon dioxide for the next 3 centuries, something which should be obvious to anybody cannot be done. I don't even know if our species will still exist in 300 years. And if we still exist, we may be very different. We will have very different powers and abilities, and figuring out what would happen by calculating the costs if there is no change at all for the next 300 years, it seems to me, is either insane or dishonest. And I find that very irritating.
Do you feel that in our society dishonesty is becoming more popular?
I don't know. It's very hard to tell. My first encounter with academic dishonesty would have been something close to 50 years ago. I spent a summer in Washington and ended up working with a group that was preparing a fact book on state and local finance. And it was supposed to tell the ordinary layman the things he would have to know to understand the issues in how you raise the money for states and localities. And I came across a fact, and it was an unquestionably true fact because it was a demographic fact about people already born. It was unquestionably an important fact because it was a fact about the need for spending money on schooling, and schooling was and is the largest expenditure of states and localities. The people I was working with refused to include the fact in their fact book because it pointed in the wrong direction. They wanted to persuade people that state and local governments would need more money. But the particular fact was that we had a high birth rate after World War II. It was the baby boom, it was called. The result was that in the roughly what, I suppose 15 or 20, maybe 20 years after World War II, more and more kids were going into the school system, which meant that in order to keep the spending per student constant, you had to raise taxes. By the time we were working, the opposite was happening. The baby boom was coming out of the school system and into the labor market. So the ratio of taxpayers to school-age children was going up instead of down. That meant that you could maintain the same spending per pupil with lower taxes, and they were not willing to include that in their fact book. And I was shocked by the fact that there were people I liked, they were, intelligent professional intellectuals, and that they were willing to print deliberately dishonest work by leaving out facts that pointed in the wrong direction. So that was true then. I suspect that if I had been active, 100 years ago, I would have found similar examples, though I didn't, obviously. So I don't know if it's becoming more common. I see a good deal of it, but then I think probably one could see a good deal of it at other times as well.
Seems like a big obstacle for those that seek truth, that seek knowledge, is another academics.
Yes. Fortunately, I am not employed by a university at this point. I'm retired. I don't require a publisher to publish my books. I can self-publish books, and I can put things on the web, on my web page and my blog. So one way in which the world has improved is that it is easier to put arguments and ideas and information where people can see it without passing through the filter of a major publisher or a university that has to do it. Now, it's still hard because readers, naturally enough, don't necessarily believe what you put up. So what you have to do is to not only put up your conclusions, but the reasons for them. And my view in general is that you shouldn't believe anybody on his conclusions. That if somebody, if William Nordhaus, who got a Nobel Prize for his work on the economics of climate, tells you something, you should not believe it until you see how he calculated it, how he did it, what assumptions went into it. And that is true whether it's somebody who agrees with me or who disagrees with me. There are certainly lots of libertarians I don't believe either, because I think they say things without good reason to know them.
Just don't name Rothbard.
I won't. Wouldn't be limited to Rothbard, I'm sure.
No. Professor, so you said, yes, you're retired, so you have your age, you have studied a lot, you have lived a lot. Do you think wisdom comes with age?
Not always. Probably my first book was my best book, and I wrote that in my 20s. So I think in some fields the pattern is the originality is more likely with youth. That if you've been in a field for a long time, you've sort of adopted all the things everybody else believes, whereas you're new, you may be able to see different things. So age has some advantages. You've got a whole lot of experience. Age also has some tendency to make you substitute crystallized intelligence for fluid intelligence, which means that you solve a problem by remembering how you solved it before instead of by figuring out anew. And that sometimes works, but sometimes circumstances have changed, and so that can be a serious mistake. So I don't think there are simple answers to most of these questions.
I completely agree. So why do you think your first book was the best one?
Partly because I had things to say that people hadn't said before, and different ways of saying them. I'd been arguing with people for many years, so I have lots and lots of practice, and I was enthusiastic and full of energy writing it up. But it's hard to be sure. I liked some of my other books too, but I think that's been the most influential, and it's probably the best.
Do you consider yourself a patience person?
A patience?
Patience, that take things slow, that it doesn't get exalted, that it's really comprehensive.
It depends what sorts of things. But certainly my writing I take slowly. I decided a good many years ago that I should spend 2 hours a day, 7 days a week on writing projects, and I've done that ever since. When we finish this and I go back to my hotel, I will spend 2 hours doing something related to actually getting the current edition of my first book set up for a hardcover edition, self-published, which is one of the things I've been doing. It may not take 2 hours, but I've had some problems getting it set up for that. So, you know, I'm willing to spend time doing things, but I can certainly be impatient in the sense if I've got good food that I want to eat, or a book that I really want to read and I want it to come out, it hasn't come out yet. I'm a little worried that one of my favorite series, the next book may not come out because the author's quite old, and the next book in the series was supposed to come out a couple of months ago and didn't come out. Sort of impatient for that. So I don't know if I was patient or impatient. I don't think that's a very useful distinction.
Professor, when you published your first book, Machinery of Freedom, were you nervous, anxious? Because we've been talking about that, you know, you went to physics trying to avoiding being related to your father's work, right? Because you have
I have no objection to being related to my father. That was great good fortune. But I had to have an objection to being identified primarily as his son rather than as me.
Absolutely. And you didn't feel anxious for starting to get into economics with the book?
I don't think so. It wasn't really an economics book in any technical sense. It was more nearly political philosophy
yes.
with economics in it. But
you still got a bit of the theory, the incentives, and
when my wife went to Oberlin College, she was apparently more noticeable than she realized. She's a very bright woman, and she tells the story that when her younger sister came to Oberlin, somebody introduced her as this is Barbara Cook, and she's a person in her own right. Don't identify her as her sister.
Well, you also Professor, now finishing, I know I don't know if you know this, but most of people, or a lot of libertarians, see you a role model as an intellectual to follow that's been studied, that used sometimes as an example for the road of to seek knowledge. What advice would you give to young people that are getting into these ideas or are getting into these they have this fire with curiosity, seeking.
Do things that are interesting to you. Do things that you enjoy doing, because you're unlikely to do a good job of things that just bore you. So try to find out what part of the project is a part that appeals to you, that you are interested in, that you think you're good at, and do that. That I believe in the division of labor, because I'm an economist. And there are different answers for different people.
Professor, so just finishing, I'm gonna say something kind of corny, but it's been an amazing experience to be able to spend time with you this week. I have learned so much, and I'm astonished by your humility, and I hope that you can write much more.
Well, I probably will produce a couple more books, I would guess, from the things I'm working on at the moment. But if people want to have contact with me, I've got books you can read, some of them even in Spanish, though mostly not. I've got a web page with a whole lot of articles you can read, and webbed English texts of my books you can read. I've got a blog, which I don't post on very much nowadays, but I've posted on for a long time, and it's got a lot of stuff on different things. If you don't read English, Google Translator is translate as your friend, and it's free. So if people want to get exposed to my ideas, there are lots of ways that do not require bringing me to your country.
Until we get the technology that we can hear in other languages, right? Thank you, Professor, very much for the visiting. Muchas gracias, chiquillos. Lamento, a veces se me traspapela el inglés, pero espero hayan podido disfrutar esta entrevista que buscaba ser un poco diferente, con una de las mentes más peculiares del mundo del libertarianismo de nuestros días. Espero lo hayan podido disfrutar, difundir. Recuerden que si quieren conocer más sobre el profesor Friedman, pueden meterse a su página web, que la vamos a dejar en la descripción de este video, y esperamos que la libertad siga difundiéndose como valor y todos podamos trabajar juntos para hacer el mundo un lugar un poquito mejor. Muchas gracias.